The summer heat was unbearable that afternoon in the small town of Cedar Falls. The sun hung high in the sky, burning down on the empty parking lot of the old gas station near Highway 12. Most people stayed inside their homes, hiding from the heat, drinking cold water and waiting for the evening to bring some relief. But not everyone had that choice. Sarah Mitchell was 23 years old. She had blonde hair that fell past her shoulders and bright blue eyes that always seemed to carry a mix of hope and sadness. Sarah was born with cerebral palsy, a condition that affected her legs and made walking difficult. She used a wheelchair most of the time, but on good days she could manage short distances with her metal crutches. Today was supposed to be one of those good days. Sarah lived with her elderly grandmother in a small house about 2 miles from the gas station. Her grandmother, Martha, was 78 years old and had raised Sarah since she was a baby. Sarah's parents had died in a car accident when she was only 3 years old, and Martha had taken her in without a second thought. They did not have much money, but they had love, and that was enough for both of them. On this particular day, Sarah had decided to walk to the convenience store attached to the gas station. She wanted to buy her grandmother a birthday card. Martha's birthday was the next day, and Sarah had saved up $12 from selling handmade bracelets at the local craft fair. She wanted to get a nice card and maybe some flowers if she had enough money left over. The walk was long and hard. Sarah moved slowly, her crutches clicking against the hot pavement with each step. Sweat dripped down her forehead and soaked through her light blue dress. Her legs ached, and several times she had to stop and rest. But she kept going. She wanted to surprise her grandmother with something special. When Sarah finally reached the gas station, she was exhausted. Her arms trembled from the effort of using her crutches for so long. She leaned against the wall outside the convenience store, trying to catch her breath before going inside. That was when she heard the rumble of motorcycles approaching. There were 5 of them. 5 large motorcycles with chrome pipes that gleamed in the sunlight. The riders wore black leather jackets despite the heat, and their faces were hard and unfriendly. They pulled into the gas station and parked their bikes in a row near the air pump. The leader of the group was a big man with a shaved head and a thick beard. His name was Duke, though Sarah did not know that yet. She did not know anything about these men except that something about them made her feel afraid. Sarah tried to ignore them. She pushed herself away from the wall and began making her way toward the store entrance. Her crutches scraped against the concrete, making a sound that drew the attention of the bikers. Duke turned his head and watched her struggle toward the door. A cruel smile spread across his face. "Hey, boys, look at this," Duke said loudly. His voice was rough, like gravel being crushed under a boot. "We got ourselves a cripple." The other bikers laughed. It was an ugly sound, mean and mocking. Sarah's face turned red with embarrassment. She tried to move faster, but her legs would not cooperate. The more she hurried, the more she stumbled. Her left crutch slipped on a patch of oil, and she nearly fell. She caught herself just in time, but the bikers laughed even harder. "What's the matter, sweetheart?" another biker called out. He was younger than Duke, with long, greasy hair and a cigarette dangling from his lips. "Forget how to walk?" Sarah did not answer. She kept her eyes on the door of the convenience store. It was only 20 feet away. If she could just make it inside, she would be safe. The store clerk would help her. Someone would help her. But Duke had other ideas. He walked over and stood directly in her path, blocking the entrance to the store. Up close, he was even more intimidating. He stood over 6 feet tall and probably weighed close to 300 pounds. His arms were covered in tattoos, and his eyes were cold and empty. "Where are you going in such a hurry?" Duke asked. He did not move out of her way. "We just want to talk." "Please," Sarah said quietly. Her voice shook with fear. "I just want to go inside." "Did you hear that, boys?" Duke looked back at his friends with fake surprise. "She just wants to go inside. Isn't that sweet?" The other bikers gathered around, forming a loose circle. Sarah was trapped. She looked around desperately, hoping to see another car pulling in, another customer, anyone who might help. But the parking lot was empty except for her and the 5 bikers. "Please let me pass," Sarah tried again. "I haven't done anything to you." "That's true," Duke admitted. He scratched his beard thoughtfully. "You haven't done anything to me, but you know what? I don't like the way you walk. All that clicking and scraping. It's annoying." "I can't help how I walk," Sarah said. Tears were starting to form in her eyes. "I was born this way." "That's not my problem," Duke replied. He reached out and grabbed one of her crutches, yanking it away from her. Sarah gasped and stumbled, barely managing to stay upright on her remaining crutch. "Maybe if you didn't have these things, you wouldn't make so much noise." He tossed the crutch across the parking lot. It clattered against the pavement and skidded to a stop near the road. Sarah watched it go with horror. Without both crutches, she could barely stand, let alone walk. "Give it back," she pleaded. "Please." "I need that." "Do you?" Duke pretended to consider her request. "I don't know. What do you think, boys? Should I give it back?" "Make her crawl for it," one of the bikers shouted. "Yeah, let's see her crawl." Another agreed. Duke grinned. It was a terrible grin, full of cruelty and enjoyment. He was having fun. He was enjoying her fear and her helplessness, and that made everything worse. "You heard them," Duke said. "If you want your crutch back, you're going to have to crawl over there and get it." Sarah shook her head. Tears were streaming down her face now. "I can't. Please. My legs don't work right. I can't crawl that far." "Then I guess you're stuck here," Duke shrugged. He turned to walk back to his motorcycle, but then he stopped and looked over his shoulder. "Actually, you know what? I changed my mind." He walked back towards Sarah, and before she could react, he grabbed her remaining crutch and pulled it out from under her arm. Sarah fell. She hit the ground hard, scraping her hands and knees on the rough pavement. Pain shot through her body and she cried out. The bikers erupted in laughter. They pointed at her and made jokes at her expense. Duke threw the second crutch in the opposite direction, so that now both crutches were far away from her, in different parts of the parking lot. "Now that's better," Duke said, standing over her. "No more clicking, no more noise, just peace and quiet." Sarah lay on the ground, sobbing. Her hands were bleeding where they had scraped against the concrete. Her dress was torn, and her knees were raw and red. She tried to push herself up, but her arms were too weak, and her legs would not support her weight without the crutches. "What's wrong?" Duke mocked. "Can't get up? Maybe you should try harder." "Please stop," Sarah whispered. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I can," Duke answered simply. "Because you're weak, and I'm strong. That's how the world works, sweetheart. The weak get stepped on, and the strong do the stepping." He lifted his boot and placed it on Sarah's back, pushing her flat against the ground. Sarah whimpered in fear. She could feel the weight of his foot pressing down on her, and she was terrified that he might actually hurt her. "Duke, man, maybe we should go," one of the bikers said nervously. He was the youngest of the group, barely out of his teens. "Someone might see us." "So what?" Duke did not lift his foot from Sarah's back. "Let them see. What are they going to do about it?" The young biker looked around uncomfortably. The gas station was on a quiet stretch of highway, but that did not mean it would stay empty forever. Someone could drive by at any moment. Someone could see what they were doing. But Duke did not care. He was enjoying himself too much. He pressed down harder on Sarah's back, making her cry out in pain. "Stop! You're hurting me!" Sarah screamed. "That's the point," Duke replied. Just then, the door of the convenience store opened. An elderly man stepped out carrying a bag of groceries. He was the store clerk, a man in his 60s named Harold. He took one look at the scene in front of him and froze. "What the hell is going on here?" Harold demanded. Duke finally lifted his foot from Sarah's back. He turned to face the old man with a threatening glare. "Mind your own business, old-timer." "This is my business," Harold said, though his voice wavered. "This is my store. You can't do this here." "I can do whatever I want." Duke stepped toward the old man. "You got a problem with that?" Harold was brave, but he was not stupid. He could see that he was outnumbered and outmatched. These men were young and strong and clearly dangerous. If he tried to fight them, he would lose. "I'm calling the police," Harold said, backing toward the store door. "Go ahead," Duke laughed. "By the time they get here, we'll be long gone, and so will your little crippled friend here." Harold hesitated. He looked at Sarah, still lying on the ground, crying. He wanted to help her, but he did not know how. He was just one old man against 5 tough bikers. What could he possibly do? "It's okay," Sarah called out weakly. "Just call the police, please." Harold nodded and hurried back inside the store. Through the window, Sarah could see him pick up the phone and dial. Help was coming. She just had to hold on until then. But Duke was not going to make it easy for her. He turned back to Sarah with an annoyed expression. "That old fool is going to ruin our fun. I guess we better make the most of the time we have left." He nodded to his friends, and they gathered around Sarah in a tight circle. One of them picked up her purse, which had fallen when she hit the ground. He dumped out the contents, scattering her wallet, her phone, and her $12 across the pavement. "Look at this," he said, holding up the money. "She's got 12 whole dollars." "What a fortune." "That's mine," Sarah said desperately. "Please don't take it. I need it for my grandmother's birthday." "Aw, how sweet," the biker mocked. He stuffed the money into his pocket. "Too bad. It's mine now." Sarah felt her heart break. She had worked so hard for that money. She had spent weeks making bracelets and selling them at the craft fair. And now it was gone, taken by these cruel men who thought it was funny to torment a disabled girl. Duke bent down and picked up Sarah's phone. It was an old model, cracked and worn, but it was all she had. He looked at it with disgust and then threw it on the ground, stomping on it with his heavy boot. The screen shattered, and the phone died instantly. "Oops," Duke said without a trace of remorse. "My foot slipped." Sarah did not even have the energy to protest anymore. She just lay there, crying, waiting for the police to arrive, waiting for someone to save her from these monsters. Minutes passed, and the bikers continued their torment. They poured water on her head, calling it a baptism. They took pictures of her lying on the ground and laughed about posting them online. They kicked dirt at her and made cruel jokes about her disability. And through it all, Sarah just kept thinking about her grandmother. Martha was waiting for her at home, probably wondering why she was taking so long. She would be worried. She would be scared. And there was nothing Sarah could do about it. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the pavement grew hotter beneath Sarah's body. Her skin burned where it touched the ground, and her throat was dry from crying. She had never felt so helpless in her entire life. And then she heard it. Another engine. Not a motorcycle this time, but a car. A large vehicle pulling into the gas station. Sarah lifted her head, hoping against hope that it might be the police. But it was not the police. It was something else entirely. It was a dusty old pickup truck, and behind the wheel was a woman. A black woman with gray hair and kind eyes. She pulled into the parking lot and stopped her truck right in front of Duke's motorcycle. The bikers turned to look at the newcomer. Duke sneered. "What do we have here? Another one wanting to play hero?" The woman did not answer. She turned off her engine and sat there for a moment, just looking at the scene before her. Her eyes moved from Sarah, lying broken on the ground, to the 5 bikers standing over her like predators over prey. Her face did not show fear. It did not show anger. It showed something else entirely. It showed determination. She opened her door and stepped out of the truck. She was not a young woman. She was probably in her 60s, maybe older. She was not particularly tall or strong. But there was something about her, something in the way she carried herself, that made even Duke pause. "You boys having fun?" the woman asked calmly. "This doesn't concern you," Duke replied. "Get back in your truck and drive away, unless you want to end up like her." The woman looked down at Sarah. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. A silent understanding, a promise. "It concerns me now," the woman said quietly. And that was when everything changed. The woman's name was Dolores Jackson. She was 64 years old and had lived in Cedar County her entire life. She had seen a lot of things in those 64 years. She had lived through the civil rights movement. She had buried her husband 10 years ago and raised 3 children on her own after that. She had worked 2 jobs most of her life, cleaning houses during the day and cooking at a diner at night. Life had not been easy for Dolores, but it had made her strong in ways that these young bikers could not understand. Dolores walked toward the group slowly but steadily. Her worn boots crunched against the gravel and broken glass of the parking lot. She did not take her eyes off Duke, not even for a second. He was the leader, she could tell. He was the one she needed to deal with first. "I said this doesn't concern you," Duke repeated louder this time. "Are you deaf or just stupid?" "I heard you just fine," Dolores replied calmly. "And I'm not going anywhere." Duke laughed, but there was an edge of uncertainty in it now. This old woman was not reacting the way he expected. Most people would have driven away by now, afraid of getting involved, afraid of what might happen to them. But Dolores stood her ground like a mountain that refused to move. "Lady, you don't know who you're messing with," one of the other bikers said. He was the one with the greasy hair and cigarette. "We're the Iron Wolves. This whole county knows better than to cross us." "I know exactly who you are," Dolores said. She stopped walking about 10 feet away from the group. "You're a bunch of grown men who think it's fun to hurt a girl who can't defend herself. You're cowards. Every single one of you." The word hit them like a slap across the face. Duke's expression darkened with anger. He took a step toward Dolores, his hands clenched into fists. "You better watch your mouth, old woman," he growled. "Or what?" Dolores asked. "You going to knock me down too? You going to take my crutches away? Oh wait, I don't have any. I guess you'll just have to push an old lady to the ground and feel real proud of yourself." Duke hesitated. Dolores was calling his bluff, and they both knew it. Hurting a disabled young woman was one thing. It was cruel, but in Duke's twisted mind, he could justify it. She was young, she was weak, and nobody was watching. But attacking an elderly black woman in broad daylight? That was different. That would bring attention. That would bring consequences. "Just get out of here," Duke said finally. "This isn't your fight." "Every fight against cruelty is my fight," Dolores replied. She looked past Duke to where Sarah still lay on the hot pavement. "Baby girl, can you hear me?" Sarah lifted her head. Her face was streaked with tears and dirt, but her eyes were clear. "Yes, ma'am." "I'm going to help you, okay? Just hold on a little longer." "Ma'am, please be careful," Sarah said. "There are 5 of them." "I can count," Dolores said with a small smile. "But numbers don't mean everything." Duke stepped forward, blocking Dolores's view of Sarah. "You're really starting to annoy me, lady. I'm giving you one last chance. Get in your truck and leave, now." Dolores did not move. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. It was an old flip phone, nothing fancy, but it worked just fine for what she needed. "What are you doing?" Duke demanded. "I'm recording you," Dolores said simply. She held up the phone so the camera was pointed at Duke's face. "Smile, you're going to be famous." Duke's face went pale. He had not expected this. He reached for the phone, but Dolores pulled it back out of his reach. "Touch me, and this video goes live," Dolores warned. "I already sent the beginning to my daughter. She's a lawyer in Atlanta, and my grandson is a reporter for the local news. One word from me, and your faces will be all over the evening broadcast." It was a bluff. Dolores did not have a daughter who was a lawyer, and her grandson worked at an auto shop, not a news station. But Duke did not know that. All he knew was that this old woman had evidence of what they were doing, and evidence was dangerous. "You're lying," Duke said, but he did not sound sure. "Am I?" Dolores raised an eyebrow. "You want to take that chance? You want to spend the rest of your life being known as the tough guy who beats up disabled girls? Because I promise you, that's what's going to happen. Everyone will see exactly who you are." The other bikers were getting nervous now. They exchanged worried looks and shifted their weight from foot to foot. This had gone too far. What started as a cruel joke was turning into something much more serious. "Duke, man, let's just go," the youngest biker said. He was the one who had suggested leaving earlier. "This isn't worth it." "Shut up," Duke snapped. But he was thinking, he was calculating, and Dolores could see the exact moment when he realized he had lost. "This isn't over," Duke said finally. He pointed a finger at Dolores. "You remember that? This isn't over." "For her, it is," Dolores replied, nodding toward Sarah. "You're going to leave her alone. You're going to get on your motorcycles and ride away. And if I ever hear about you hurting anyone else in this county, I will personally make sure every person in 100 miles knows exactly what kind of men you are." Duke stared at her for a long moment. His jaw was tight with anger, and his eyes burned with hatred. But in the end, he turned away. He walked back to his motorcycle, and his friends followed. One by one, they climbed onto their bikes and started their engines. Before he rode away, Duke looked back at Dolores one last time. "This isn't over," he repeated. "Yes, it is," Dolores said quietly. "You just don't know it yet." The motorcycles roared to life, and the iron wolves rode out of the parking lot and onto the highway. Within seconds, they were gone, disappearing around a bend in the road. The rumble of their engines faded into the distance until all that remained was silence. Dolores put her phone back in her pocket and hurried over to Sarah. She knelt down beside the young woman and gently helped her sit up. "Are you okay, baby?" Dolores asked, her voice soft with concern. "Did they hurt you bad?" Sarah shook her head, though it was not entirely true. Her hands and knees were scraped and bleeding, and her whole body ached from lying on the hot pavement. But compared to what could have happened, she was okay. She was alive. "Thank you," Sarah whispered. "Thank you so much. I don't know what they would have done if you hadn't come." "Don't think about that," Dolores said firmly. "What matters is that you're safe now." She looked around and spotted Sarah's crutches, still lying where Duke had thrown them. She retrieved them both and brought them back to Sarah. "Can you stand?" Dolores asked. "I think so. With help." Dolores put one arm around Sarah's waist and helped her to her feet. Sarah gripped her crutches tightly, leaning on them for support. Her legs were shaky, and she felt dizzy from the heat and the stress, but she managed to stay upright. "Let's get you into my truck," Dolores said. "There's air conditioning, and I have some water. You need to cool down and rest." Sarah did not argue. She let Dolores guide her across the parking lot to the old pickup truck. Dolores opened the passenger door and helped Sarah climb inside. The interior of the truck was cool and dark, a blessed relief from the burning sun outside. Sarah sank into the seat and closed her eyes. Dolores walked around to the driver's side and got in. She reached behind the seat and pulled out a bottle of water, which she handed to Sarah. "Drink," Dolores instructed. "Slowly. You don't want to make yourself sick." Sarah took the bottle and drank gratefully. The water was cool and sweet, and it soothed her dry throat. She had not realized how thirsty she was until that moment. "Thank you," Sarah said again. "You saved my life." "I don't know about that," Dolores replied. "But I couldn't just drive by and do nothing. No decent person could." "You'd be surprised," Sarah said bitterly. "A lot of people just look the other way." Dolores nodded slowly. She knew that better than anyone. She had spent her whole life watching people look the other way. When she was a child in the segregated South, plenty of people had looked the other way. When her husband was passed over for promotion after promotion because of the color of his skin, people had looked the other way. Looking the other way was easier. It was safer. It did not require courage or sacrifice. But Dolores had never been able to do it. Even when it would have been easier to stay silent, even when speaking up put her at risk, she had always found herself unable to just walk away. It was a quality that had gotten her in trouble more than once over the years, but it was also the quality she was most proud of. "What's your name, baby?" Dolores asked. "Sarah Mitchell." "Well, Sarah, I'm Dolores Jackson, and I'm very glad I decided to stop for gas today." Despite everything, Sarah smiled. "Me too, Mrs. Jackson. Please, call me Dolores." The door of the convenience store opened and Harold came hurrying out. He had been watching through the window ever since the bikers left, and now that it was safe, he wanted to check on Sarah. "Are you all right?" Harold asked breathlessly. "I called the police. They should be here any minute." "I'm okay," Sarah assured him. "This lady helped me." Harold looked at Dolores with gratitude and admiration. "That was incredibly brave, ma'am. I've never seen anyone stand up to those guys before. Everyone's too scared." "Fear is a choice," Dolores said simply. "I chose not to be afraid." Harold shook his head in amazement. "Well, you're a hero in my book. Both of you." He looked at Sarah. "You were brave too, young lady. You didn't give up." Sarah looked down at her hands, still scraped and bloody. "I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified." "That's what bravery is," Dolores said gently. "It's being terrified and keeping going anyway." A few minutes later, a police car pulled into the gas station. Two officers got out and approached the truck. Dolores and Sarah gave their statements, describing everything that had happened. Harold added his own account, and the officers took careful notes. "We know the Iron Wolves," one of the officers said grimly. "They've been causing trouble around here for years, but no one's ever been willing to press charges before." "I'm willing," Sarah said firmly. "What they did was wrong, and they should face consequences." The officer nodded approvingly. "We'll do everything we can. With your statements and any video evidence." He looked at Dolores questioningly. Dolores shook her head with a small, embarrassed smile. "I'm afraid I was bluffing about the video. My phone was in my pocket the whole time. I just said that to scare them off." The officer laughed, despite himself. "That was a pretty good bluff, ma'am." "I've had practice," Dolores replied. After the police finished their investigation, they offered to drive Sarah home, but Dolores shook her head. "I'll take her," Dolores said. "It's the least I can do." "Are you sure?" Sarah asked. "I don't want to trouble you. You've already done so much." "It's no trouble at all," Dolores insisted. "Besides, I want to make sure you get home safely." Sarah gave Dolores directions to her grandmother's house, and they set off. The drive was quiet at first. Sarah stared out the window, watching the familiar landscape pass by. Fields of corn and soybeans stretched to the horizon, broken only by the occasional farmhouse or barn. It was a peaceful scene, a stark contrast to the violence she had just experienced. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said finally. "Of course." "Why did you stop? I mean, really. You could have just driven by. You could have told yourself it wasn't your problem. Why did you get involved?" Dolores was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "When I was a little girl," she began, "about 6 or 7 years old, I was walking home from school one day. Some older boys started following me. They were white boys, and I was black, and in those days, that meant they could do whatever they wanted to me without any consequences." Sarah listened intently, her heart aching with sympathy. "They started throwing rocks at me," Dolores continued, "calling me names, telling me I didn't belong there, that I should go back to Africa. I was so scared. I just kept walking, trying to ignore them, hoping they would get bored and leave me alone." "What happened?" Sarah asked softly. "They didn't leave me alone. They kept following me, getting closer and closer. And then one of them grabbed my arm and pushed me down. I fell in the dirt just like you did today. And I thought, this is it. This is how I'm going to die." Dolores's voice was steady, but Sarah could see the pain in her eyes. This was an old wound, one that had never fully healed. "But then something happened," Dolores said. "A woman came out of her house, a white woman. She saw what was happening, and she came running over. She grabbed a broom and started swinging it at those boys, chasing them away. She helped me up and cleaned my scrapes and walked me all the way home." "That's amazing," Sarah breathed. "That woman didn't have to help me," Dolores said. "In fact, helping me probably got her in trouble with her neighbors. But she did it anyway, because she knew it was right, because she couldn't look the other way." She turned to look at Sarah, her eyes filled with warmth and wisdom. "That woman saved my life, Sarah, not just physically, but in every way that matters. She showed me that kindness exists, even in the darkest places. She showed me that people can be good, even when they have every excuse to be cruel. And she made me promise myself that if I ever had the chance to help someone the way she helped me, I would take it." Sarah felt tears streaming down her cheeks again, but these were different tears. These were tears of gratitude and hope and something else that she could not quite name. "Today was my chance," Dolores said simply, "and I took it. That's all." They drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence. When they reached Sarah's grandmother's house, a small but well-kept cottage with a garden full of flowers, Dolores helped Sarah out of the truck and walked her to the front door. Before Sarah could knock, the door flew open. Martha stood there, her face pale with worry. "Sarah, where have you been? I've been worried sick." "I'm okay, Grandma," Sarah said quickly. "Something happened, but I'm okay now. This is Mrs. Jackson. She helped me." Martha looked at Dolores with confusion and curiosity. "Helped you? What do you mean? What happened?" "It's a long story," Sarah said. "Can we come inside? I'll explain everything." Martha nodded and stepped aside, letting them enter. She led them to the small living room, where Sarah sat down on the couch with obvious relief. Her legs were aching, and her whole body felt heavy with exhaustion. Over the next hour, Sarah told her grandmother everything. She told her about the bikers, about the torment, about lying on the hot pavement feeling helpless and afraid. And she told her about Dolores, about how she had arrived like an angel sent from heaven and stood up to those men without any fear, about how she had bluffed them into leaving and then taken care of Sarah like she was her own child. By the time Sarah finished, Martha was crying. She got up from her chair and walked over to Dolores, who was sitting quietly on the other end of the couch. "Thank you," Martha said. Her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for saving my granddaughter." Dolores stood up and took Martha's hands in her own. "You don't have to thank me. Any decent person would have done the same." "No," Martha shook her head. "Not any decent person. Just you. You're special, Mrs. Jackson. You're a gift from God." Dolores smiled gently. "Please, call me Dolores, and I'm no gift. I'm just an old woman who was in the right place at the right time." Martha pulled Dolores into a hug, and Dolores hugged her back. They stood there for a long moment, two elderly women from different backgrounds, different races, different walks of life, united by their love for a young woman who had been through something terrible and survived. When they finally separated, Martha wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. "You're staying for dinner," Martha declared. It was not a question. "I won't take no for an answer," Dolores laughed softly. "Well, when you put it like that, how can I refuse?" The kitchen smelled of fried chicken and fresh biscuits. Martha had insisted on cooking her best meal for Dolores, despite Dolores's protests that she did not need anything fancy. Sarah helped as much as she could, peeling potatoes and setting the table, grateful to have something normal to focus on after the trauma of the afternoon. As they cooked, Sarah learned more about Dolores. She learned that Dolores had been married for 42 years, before her husband Robert passed away from cancer. She learned that Dolores had 3 children, all grown now, scattered across the country pursuing their own lives. She learned that Dolores lived alone in a small house on the other side of town and spent most of her time volunteering at the local soup kitchen and church. Loneliness is the hardest part of getting old, Dolores admitted as she helped Martha stir the gravy. Your body slows down, your friends start dying, and before you know it, you're spending most of your days talking to yourself. That's why you should visit us more often, Martha said warmly. We could use the company. Sarah nodded eagerly. Please, Dolores, I'd love to see you again. Dolores smiled, her eyes glistening with unexpected emotion. I'd like that very much. They sat down to dinner as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow through the kitchen window. The food was simple but delicious, made with love and gratitude. They talked and laughed and shared stories, and for a little while the horror of the afternoon faded into the background. But it did not disappear entirely. Sarah found herself jumping at sudden noises and tensing whenever she heard an engine outside. The memory of Duke's cruel face loomed in her mind, and she could not shake the feeling that he might come back. He had promised that it was not over. What if he meant it? Dolores noticed Sarah's unease. After dinner, when Martha went to wash the dishes, Dolores sat down next to Sarah on the living room couch. You're still scared, Dolores said gently. It was not a question. Sarah nodded, unable to deny it. He said it wasn't over. What if he comes back? What if he hurts my grandmother? Dolores took Sarah's hand and held it firmly. Listen to me, baby. Men like Duke are all talk. They're bullies, and bullies are cowards at heart. They pick on people who can't fight back because it makes them feel powerful. But the moment someone stands up to them, they crumble. You weren't afraid of him at all? Sarah said wonderingly. How did you do that? I was afraid, Dolores admitted. I was terrified. My heart was beating so fast I thought it might jump out of my chest. But I've learned something in my 64 years on this earth. Fear is just a feeling. It doesn't have to control you. You can feel afraid and still do what needs to be done. Sarah thought about that for a moment. I want to be brave like you. I want to be able to stand up for myself and not let people push me around. You're braver than you think, Dolores said. You didn't give up today. You didn't beg or plead. You held on to your dignity even when they tried to take it from you. That takes courage. It didn't feel like courage, Sarah said quietly. It felt like survival. Sometimes that's the same thing, Dolores replied. Later that evening, after Dolores had gone home with promises to return soon, Sarah sat by the window and watched the stars come out. Her grandmother was already in bed, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the day, but Sarah could not sleep. Her mind kept replaying everything that had happened over and over again. She thought about Duke and the iron wolves. She thought about the cruelty in their eyes and the pleasure they took in her suffering. She thought about how close she had come to something worse, something she did not want to imagine. But mostly she thought about Dolores. She thought about this remarkable woman who had appeared out of nowhere and changed everything. A stranger who had no reason to help her, no obligation to get involved, but who had done so anyway simply because it was right. In a world that often seemed dark and hopeless, Dolores was a light. She was proof that goodness still existed, that kindness could overcome cruelty, that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they refused to look away. The next morning was Martha's birthday. Sarah woke up early, determined to make the day special despite having lost the money for a birthday card. She made her grandmother breakfast in bed, a simple meal of scrambled eggs and toast, and sang happy birthday, while Martha laughed and wiped happy tears from her eyes. "This is the best birthday present," Martha said, pulling Sarah into a hug. "Having you here, safe and sound, that's all I ever wanted." Around noon, there was a knock on the door. Sarah answered it to find Dolores standing on the porch, holding a wrapped present and a bouquet of flowers. "I heard it was someone's birthday," Dolores said with a smile. Martha came to the door, and her face lit up when she saw Dolores. "You came back." "Of course I did," Dolores replied. "I wasn't about to miss the celebration." They spent the afternoon together, the three of them. Dolores had brought a homemade chocolate cake, Martha's favorite, and they ate it on the back porch while watching the birds in the garden. Martha opened her present, a beautiful handmade quilt that Dolores had been working on for months. "I was going to donate it to the church auction," Dolores explained, "but I think it found a better home." Martha ran her fingers over the intricate stitching, marveling at the craftsmanship. "It's beautiful. I can't accept this." "You can and you will," Dolores said firmly. "Consider it a gift from one old lady to another." As the afternoon wore on, Sarah excused herself and went to her room. She sat at her desk and began to write. The words flowed out of her, a torrent of emotion and gratitude that she had been holding inside. She wrote about what had happened at the gas station. She wrote about her fear and her pain and her hopelessness. And she wrote about Dolores, about the miracle of her arrival, about the courage and compassion that had saved her life. When she finished, she had written nearly 10 pages. She did not know what she would do with it yet. Maybe she would share it with someone. Maybe she would keep it private. But writing it down made it real. It made her feel like the experience had meaning, like something good could come out of something terrible. The weeks that followed were difficult. Sarah had nightmares almost every night. She saw Duke's face in her dreams, felt his boot on her back, heard the cruel laughter of his friends. She jumped at loud noises and avoided going outside alone. The trauma had left invisible scars that would take time to heal, but she was not alone. Dolores came to visit almost every day. She would sit with Sarah on the porch and talk about everything and nothing. She would listen when Sarah needed to vent and offer gentle advice when Sarah was ready to hear it. She became more than just a savior. She became a friend, and slowly, painfully, Sarah began to heal. 1 month after the incident, Sarah received a phone call from the district attorney's office. Duke and 2 of his friends had been arrested and charged with assault, theft, and harassment. The other 2 bikers had fled the state, but warrants had been issued for their arrest. The case was going to trial, and the DA wanted Sarah to testify. Sarah was terrified at the thought of seeing Duke again, even in a courtroom, but she knew she had to do it. Not just for herself, but for all the other people Duke had hurt over the years, all the victims who had been too scared to speak up. "I'll be there with you," Dolores promised when Sarah told her about the trial. "Every step of the way. You won't have to face him alone." The trial took place 3 months later. Sarah sat in the witness stand, her hands trembling, as she recounted what had happened that day at the gas station. Duke sat at the defense table, staring at her with cold, hateful eyes, but Sarah did not let him intimidate her. She kept her voice steady and her gaze forward, telling her story with honesty and courage. Dolores testified as well. She described what she had seen when she pulled into the gas station, the image of a young disabled woman lying on the ground while 5 men stood over her laughing. She described confronting Duke and his friends, the fear she felt, the determination that kept her standing. Harold, the store clerk, testified too. He confirmed everything Sarah and Dolores said and added details about the Iron Wolves' history of harassment and violence. In the end, the jury found Duke guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. His 2 friends received similar sentences. Justice at last had been served. After the verdict was announced, Sarah and Dolores walked out of the courthouse together. The sun was shining, and there was a cool breeze in the air. It felt like the first day of a new chapter. "We did it," Sarah said, her voice filled with wonder. "We actually did it." "You did it," Dolores corrected. "You stood up in that courtroom and told the truth even though it scared you. That took more courage than anything I've ever done." Sarah turned to Dolores, her eyes shining with tears. "I couldn't have done it without you. Any of it. You saved me, Dolores, not just that day at the gas station, but every day since then. You showed me that I don't have to be a victim. You showed me that I can be strong." Dolores smiled, her own eyes glistening. "You were always strong, baby. You just needed someone to remind you." They hugged tightly, there on the steps of the courthouse, as people walked past them barely noticing. Two women from different generations, different backgrounds, different colors, bound together by an experience that had changed both of their lives forever. In the months and years that followed, Sarah and Dolores remained close. They saw each other regularly, sharing meals and stories and laughter. Dolores became like a second grandmother to Sarah, and Martha treated Dolores like the sister she had never had. Sarah went back to school, something she had always wanted to do but had been too afraid to pursue. She studied counseling, wanting to help other people who had experienced trauma. She graduated with honors and got a job at a local crisis center, where she worked with victims of violence and abuse. She never forgot what had happened to her. The scars, both visible and invisible, remained, but they did not define her. They were reminders of what she had overcome, proof of her resilience and strength. On the anniversary of that terrible day at the gas station, Sarah always made a point to visit Dolores. They would sit on Dolores's porch, drink sweet tea, and watch the sunset together. They rarely talked about what had happened. They did not need to. The memory was always there, a shadow that would never fully disappear. But it was a shadow that they had conquered together. Years passed. Martha eventually passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 87. Sarah was devastated by the loss, but Dolores was there to comfort her, just as she had always been. "Your grandmother loved you more than anything in this world," Dolores told Sarah at the funeral. "And she was so proud of the woman you've become. Don't ever forget that." Sarah did not forget. She carried her grandmother's love with her always, along with the love of the remarkable woman who had become her dearest friend. When Dolores turned 80, Sarah threw her a surprise birthday party. All of Dolores's children and grandchildren came from across the country to celebrate. The small house was filled with laughter and music and love, the sounds of a life well lived. Sarah gave a speech at the party. She told the story of how she and Dolores had met, of the day at the gas station that had changed both of their lives. Many of the people in attendance had heard the story before, but they listened with rapt attention anyway. It was a story worth telling, a story worth remembering. "Dolores taught me something that day," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "She taught me that kindness is the most powerful force in the world. That one person, one act of courage, can change everything. She taught me that we all have the power to make a difference, even when we feel small and afraid. And she taught me that the bonds we form with others, the connections we make across all the lines that are supposed to divide us, those are the things that truly matter." She raised her glass to Dolores, who was sitting in a chair of honor, surrounded by the people who loved her most. "To Dolores Jackson," Sarah said, "my hero, my friend, my family, happy birthday." The room erupted in applause and cheers. Dolores wiped tears from her eyes, overwhelmed by the love and gratitude that filled the room. Later that night, after the party was over and the guests had gone home, Sarah and Dolores sat alone on the porch. The stars were out, bright points of light against the velvet sky. "Thank you," Dolores said quietly, "for everything." "I should be the one thanking you," Sarah replied. "You saved my life." Dolores shook her head. We saved each other. That's what people do when they care about each other. They save each other. Sarah reached over and took Dolores's hand. The skin was wrinkled and thin, showing the marks of age, but the grip was still strong. It was the same hand that had helped Sarah up from the ground all those years ago, the same hand that had held hers through trials and tribulations and countless cups of tea. "I love you, Dolores," Sarah said simply. "I love you too, baby," Dolores replied. They sat there in comfortable silence, watching the stars and listening to the crickets sing. Two women, brought together by violence and transformed by love. Two souls, intertwined across the boundaries of race and age and circumstance. And in that moment, on that quiet summer night, everything was exactly as it should be. 5 years later, Dolores passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by family and friends who loved her deeply. Sarah was at her bedside, holding her hand until the very end. The funeral was held at the church where Dolores had volunteered for so many years. Hundreds of people attended, a testament to the impact she had made on so many lives. Sarah gave the eulogy, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. She told the story one last time. The story of a disabled girl and 5 cruel bikers and an elderly black woman who refused to look away. The story of courage and compassion and the unbreakable bonds of human connection. "Dolores taught me that we are all responsible for each other," Sarah said. "That when we see someone in need, we have a choice to make. We can look away and tell ourselves it's not our problem, or we can step forward and be the help that someone desperately needs." She paused, gathering herself. "Dolores always stepped forward, every single time. That's the legacy she leaves behind. Not just for me, but for everyone whose life she touched. She showed us what it means to be truly human, to love without conditions, to help without expecting anything in return, to see the dignity in every person, no matter who they are or where they come from." Sarah looked out at the crowd, at all the faces wet with tears, at all the lives that had been changed by one remarkable woman. "The world is darker without Dolores Jackson," she said, "but it's also brighter because she was in it. And as long as we remember her, as long as we carry her example in our hearts and live by her principles, she will never truly be gone." After the funeral, Sarah returned to Dolores's house one last time. She walked through the empty rooms, touching the furniture, breathing in the fading scent of lavender that had always filled the air. On the kitchen table, she found an envelope with her name on it. Inside was a letter, written in Dolores's careful handwriting. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then I've gone home to be with the Lord. Don't be sad for me, baby. I've lived a good life and I have no regrets. I want you to know how much you mean to me. The day I found you in that parking lot was one of the most important days of my life. Not because I saved you, but because you saved me. Before that day, I was just a lonely old woman, waiting to die. You gave me a purpose again. You gave me a family. I know you think I'm the strong one, but the truth is, you're stronger than you know. You've overcome so much, and you've turned your pain into a gift that you give to others. I'm so proud of you, Sarah. So proud of the woman you've become. Keep being brave. Keep standing up for the people who can't stand up for themselves. Keep loving fiercely and living fully. That's my final wish for you. I'll be watching over you from heaven, baby. And every time you see a shooting star, know that it's me sending you my love. Forever yours, Dolores Sarah held the letter to her chest and wept. She wept for the loss of her friend, her mentor, her second grandmother. She wept for all the conversations they would never have, all the cups of tea they would never share, all the sunsets they would never watch together. But she also wept with gratitude. Gratitude for the years they had shared. Gratitude for the love that had transformed both of their lives. Gratitude for the day that had started with so much horror and ended with so much grace. That night, Sarah sat alone on her own porch, looking up at the sky. A shooting star streaked across the darkness, bright and beautiful, and gone in an instant. Sarah smiled through her tears and whispered, "I love you too, Dolores." And somewhere, she knew, Dolores heard her. The end.